A hunter walked up to my trailhead kiosk last October with a rifle so new the recoil pad still smelled like the box, chambered in whatever cartridge the algorithm was pushing that year. Told me it was the flattest shooting, hardest hitting round on the market. 2 days later, he was back asking how search and rescue tracks a wounded animal that made it into the timber. 17 years on this district, and one cartridge keeps doing the job every trendy one only promises to do. It's not new. It's not exciting. Some of you are going to be mad before I even say the name. Stick around anyway. I'm Ranger Jack. I check permits at the trailhead. I coordinate recoveries with game wardens, and I've packed out everything from a 100-pound doe to an animal that took 4 of us and a come-along. When a rifle fails somebody out here, I'm usually one of the first to hear about it, in nearly every caliber that's ever been stamped on a box. Here's my filter, and it doesn't move for marketing or internet hype. Can one rifle, in one caliber, ethically take every legal game animal in this country, from a coyote in camp to a coastal brown bear at 40 feet? And can you actually afford to shoot it enough and find ammo for it when the shelves go bare? A cartridge nobody practices with isn't a good cartridge. It's an expensive way to wound an animal. So let's run the contenders, worst to first, the way I've actually watched them perform in the field. Not on a spec sheet. Number 6. The camp round that doesn't belong on this list. The little AR platform round so many hunters already own for coyotes and hogs. It's cheap, it's soft shooting, and I understand exactly why people want it to be the answer. You can practice with it all day and never dread pulling the trigger, running light 55 to 77 grain bullets that barely nudge your shoulder. But in most states, it's flatly illegal to hunt deer with, let alone elk or bear, and where it isn't illegal, it isn't ethical. It's a varmint round wearing a big rifle's confidence. It fails the filter before we even get to the interesting arguments, because does everything has to include the biggest animals on the list, not just the smallest ones. Number 5, the long-range darling. The flat-shooting favorite built around a short action and a fantastic ballistic coefficient. Genuinely a well-engineered round, running mid-weight bullets that buck the wind far better than their size suggests. Out past 400 yards, it holds velocity better than almost anything else on this list. I've checked in hunters who dropped elk clean with it at distances most people wouldn't attempt. But I've also stood at a game check station in bear country and watched a guide shake his head at that same cartridge and say he wouldn't want it as his backup rifle if things went wrong at close range. That's the tell. It's a fantastic deer and antelope round. It is not the round for the worst-case animal on this continent, and my filter doesn't get to skip the worst case. Number 4, the Mountain Classic. The flat shooter that's been the mountain hunter's darling since the 1920s. Beautiful round, mild enough to shoot without flinching, flat enough to reach out to 400 yards with a decent rifle, carrying a bullet in the 130 to 150 grain range, and it's put more mule deer and pronghorn on the ground than almost anything else in the West. I like this cartridge. I've carried rifles chambered in it myself on days off. But take it into brown bear country and ask a guide what he thinks, and you'll get the same answer every time. Bring something with more behind it. Same problem as the last one, just wearing a different label. It does most of the job beautifully and quietly fails the part of the filter that actually matters when the stakes are highest. Number 3, the sniper's magnum. Here's where people start getting defensive, because this is the one most hunters assume automatically wins this whole conversation. A magnum with serious knockdown power, adopted by military sniper programs, and capable of putting real energy on target well past 600 yards. On paper, it's the strongest argument for one caliber does it all that exists. I won't pretend otherwise. A typical hunting rifle in this chambering runs closer to 9 or 10 pounds once you account for the longer action and heavier barrel needed to handle the pressure, and that extra steel shows up on your shoulder by the end of a long pack-in. But I've watched what this cartridge does to hunters over a full season, not just one range day. The recoil is real. Barrels wear out faster than the old standbys. I've had rangers in my own district replace throats on these rifles well before they'd ever need to on something milder. Ammo runs $3 to $5 a round, even in a good year, and when the shelves get thin, it's one of the first things to disappear because everybody wants it at once. A cartridge that punishes you every time you pull the trigger is a cartridge you stop practicing with. And a cartridge you stop practicing with fails my filter no matter what the ballistic chart says. Number 2. The Alaska Specialist, a heavier magnum, purpose-built for the biggest, angriest animals on the continent. And if your entire hunting life happened in coastal Alaska, I'd tell you to stop watching this video and go buy one. It is a phenomenal specialist tool, pushing bullets well north of 200 grains with enough energy at close range to anchor anything that walks. I've seen guides carry it as a backup rifle for exactly the situation it was designed for, slung across their chest while a client works a stalk. But strap it on to a whitetail hunter in Georgia or a kid learning to shoot her first rifle, and it turns hunting into an ordeal instead of a season you look forward to. Recoil like that teaches flinching fast, and a flinch is worse for an ethical shot than any ballistic shortfall. Overkill in one direction is still a failure of the filter, because a rifle nobody wants to carry or shoot doesn't get carried or shot. Number 1. The One. The Internet keeps calling obsolete. Something older than every cartridge on this list, and it's the one the Internet has spent the last decade telling you is obsolete. Grandpa's Round, the one people say got replaced the moment anything new showed up. I want to push back on that directly because I've had this argument with hunters at my kiosk more times than I can count, and the numbers just don't support the obsolescence claim once you actually run them. This cartridge was adopted by the United States Army in 1906 and carried American soldiers through 2 world wars and Korea in rifles from the Springfield to the Garand. It went civilian afterward and never really left. What matters for our filter isn't the military history, though. It's what that history proves about the design. A round that reliable, under that kind of pressure for that long, doesn't survive on nostalgia. It survives because the ballistics actually work. Here's the part that changes the conversation for most hunters. This cartridge loads anywhere from a light 125 grain bullet all the way up past 220 grains out of the exact same rifle. That's not a footnote. That's the whole answer to the filter. Light and fast for coyotes and varmints around camp. A mid-weight bullet in the 150 to 165 grain range for deer and antelope out to normal hunting distances. And on the heavy end, a 200-plus grain bullet with the penetration to handle elk, moose, and yes, brown bear at close range if it ever comes to that. One rifle, one cartridge. Every reloading manual printed in this country carries data for it, and it's sold in gas stations from the coast to the interior in a way none of the newer magnums can claim. When the shelves went thin a few years back, I watched the trendy short-action darlings vanish first. This one was still sitting there, in the same boxes, at the same rural counters, priced the same as it's always been. Now, does it hold up to the flashiest magnums past 600 yards? No, and I won't pretend it does. If your hunting is entirely long-range prairie work and you've got the discipline to practice at distance every week, one of those magnums might genuinely serve you better out past 400 yards. That's a real trade-off, and I'd rather tell you the truth than sell you a fantasy. But here's the question I ask every hunter who brings that up to me at the trailhead. How much of your actual hunting happens past 300 yards? For the overwhelming majority of hunters in this country, in real terrain, with real cover, the honest answer is almost none of it. You're paying a real cost in recoil, in barrel life, in ammo price and availability for a capability most hunters rarely use, and even more rarely practice enough to use accurately. There's a practical side to this that doesn't show up on a spec sheet at all, and it's the side I actually care about most. A rifle in this cartridge, in a standard bolt-action hunting configuration, runs somewhere around 7 to 8 pounds, with a scope mounted, light enough to carry all day on a ridge, heavy enough to soak up recoil without beating you up. Compare that to some of the harder-kicking magnums, which either need more steel to handle the pressure or kick hard enough that a full day of carrying and shooting starts to wear on a hunter's willingness to practice. Ergonomics matter more than people give them credit for. A rifle that's pleasant to carry gets carried more, and a rifle that's pleasant to shoot gets shot more, and both of those things directly affect whether a hunter is actually prepared when the moment comes. I've never once had a hunter tell me they skipped a practice session because this cartridge was too much to handle. I hear that excuse constantly about the harder kicking magnums, and it's never really about the money. It's about dreading the range. I'll give this cartridge its honest flaw too, because a rifle that sounds perfect should make you suspicious. It isn't the sexiest option on a gun store shelf anymore. Younger hunters sometimes look at it the same way they'd look at their grandfather's truck. Reliable, sure, but not what they pictured owning. There's a real cost to that. If a hunter doesn't feel any pride carrying a rifle, they carry it less, and a rifle in the safe doesn't put meat in the freezer. That's a legitimate consideration, and I won't wave it off just because the ballistics check out. Choose gear you'll actually want to use. But here's where the reassessment matters. For the mission I actually care about, one working rifle that gets carried into whitetail cover in October, into elk country in September, and occasionally into terrain where something with claws might be paying attention. That boring reputation stops being a weakness and starts being exactly the point. I don't need a rifle that photographs well. I need one that goes bang every single time, that I can afford to put 200 rounds through before a season without flinching or going broke, and that I can walk into nearly any sporting goods store in this country and still find ammo for. I want to give you the scenario that actually settles this for me, because it's not hypothetical. It's the kind of thing I train for every single season. A hunter down a game trail, 600 vertical feet from the truck, and something big and unhappy closes the distance faster than anybody expects. That's the worst case. That's the animal the filter has to survive, not the one on the target range with a rangefinder and all the time in the world. In that moment, the rifle that matters isn't the one with the best ballistic coefficient at 800 yards. It's the one that's already in your hands, already zeroed, loaded with a bullet heavy enough to do the job at close range, and chambered in something you've actually put enough rounds through that your hands know what to do without you thinking about it. Every recovery I've ever been part of that went right, had that in common. Every one that went wrong usually didn't. I've thought about that moment every time I've had to file a report on a close encounter in my own district. It's never the hunter with the most exotic cartridge who handles it calmly. It's the one who's shot his rifle enough times that working the bolt and finding the front sight has become automatic, something his hands do without asking his brain for permission. That's not a caliber advantage. That's a familiarity advantage. But the caliber has to make that familiarity possible in the first place. And that's exactly where the newer, harder-kicking options quietly work against the hunters who buy them. One more honest thing before I give you the verdict. Training beats caliber every single time. The best cartridge on this list doesn't fix a hunter who hasn't fired his rifle since last October. I put rounds through mine most weekends during the off-season, not because I love recoil, but because Tuesday evening practice is what actually puts meat in the freezer come fall. If a cartridge is so punishing or so hard to find that a hunter quietly stops practicing with it, it doesn't matter what the box says it can do. That's the part every spec sheet leaves out, and it's the part that decides the outcome more often than anything else on this list. If your whole hunting career happens on open prairie past 400 yards, or if you're only ever chasing coastal brown bear and nothing smaller, there are specialist cartridges that will outperform this one in their narrow lane. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, and I'd rather send you toward the right specialist tool than talk you out of one you genuinely need. But if you want one rifle in one caliber that you can hand to a beginner without punishing them, load light for camp pests and heavy for the biggest thing that legally walks this continent, find ammo for in nearly any town you drive through, and actually afford to shoot enough to be good with, this is still the answer. Not because it's flashy, because it's proven in exactly the conditions where proof matters most, season after season, long after the trendy stuff has cycled out of style. Don't buy the cartridge with the best story on the internet this year. Buy the one that's still going to be on the shelf, still going to be in your hands, and still going to do the job long after this year's hot take has been replaced by next year's. Understand the worst case your hunt could actually hand you, then pick the round that survives it. Not the round that wins an argument in the comments. Tell me where I'm wrong. What's the one caliber in your safe you'd trust with everything? And what's the worst case animal it's had to prove itself against? I read every comment. Shoot straight, and I'll see you on the trail.